Alright, let's go. Number 10. The Nehushtan in the spring of 1969. A mining archaeologist named Benno Rothenberg was excavating through cultic debris at a Midianite shrine inside a decommissioned Egyptian temple in the Timna Valley, a copper-rich formation in the southern Negev, approximately 25 kilometers north of the Gulf of Aqaba. In the debris of the shrine, Rothenberg's team found a small serpent figurine. It was approximately 12 centimeters long, coiled, with traces of gold leaf still adhering to its surface. It had been deliberately positioned in the sanctuary. It had been venerated. Rothenberg, working through the Nelson Gluck School of Biblical Archaeology and publishing his findings in the 1972 volume Timna, Valley of the Biblical Copper Mines, dated the shrine to the 12th through 11th centuries BCE, within the historical window of the Exodus narrative. The Midianites were not peripheral to the Israelites' story. Numbers 10 records that Moses' father-in-law Jethro was a Midianite priest whose people guided the Israelites through the wilderness. A venerated gilded serpent in a Midianite cultic context in the same geographic region and approximate historical period does not confirm the biblical Nehushtan, but it establishes that such an object was a real category of material culture in the region during the relevant period. The Nehushtan appears in Numbers 21. The Israelites, afflicted by serpents in the wilderness, are instructed to create a bronze serpent and mount it on a pole, and those who look upon it are healed. It survived. It was carried into Canaan. It persisted in Israelite religious life for centuries as a physical object people continued to approach for a purpose. By the time of Hezekiah's reform, approximately 715 BCE, 2 Kings 18 records that Israelites had been burning incense to it. Hezekiah destroyed it. The writer calls it, at the moment of its destruction, a piece of bronze, language calibrated to minimize 6 or 7 centuries of continuous veneration. Hezekiah's reform was systematic. The same passage records the removal of high places, smashing of sacred pillars, and destruction of Asherah poles throughout the Judean kingdom. A broken bronze serpent would be archaeologically unidentifiable in the destruction layer. What makes the Nehushtan's final status genuinely irreducible is a detail the destruction account does not address. In the Gospel of John, chapter 3, the bronze serpent lifted on a pole in the wilderness is invoked as a comparison, briefly, without explanation, as though no elaboration is needed. The writer of John is not citing a mythological memory. The reference assumes a shared understanding of the Nehushtan as a specific historical object with documented properties. Centuries after Hezekiah reduced it to a piece of bronze, it was still understood as a real thing that had existed and carried meaning requiring no introduction. The gilded serpent Rothenberg, recovered at Timna, sits today in the Eretz Israel Museum in Tel Aviv. It is approximately 3,000 years old, roughly the size of a hand. No inscription links it to any named figure. It is not the Nehushtan, the geography differs, but it is close enough in period, material, craftsmanship, and cultic function that its existence validated the basic material plausibility of the object the text describes. The original, if Hezekiah destroyed it, left no recoverable trace in more than a century of systematic excavation in and around Jerusalem. The destruction layer from his reform is documented in the stratigraphy of the city of David. The serpent is not in it. Number 9. The Urim and Thummim appear in the textual record. They arrive without manufacturing instructions. Exodus 28 describes the high priest's vestments with the precision of a formal specification. Materials, dimensions, attachment methods, the arrangement of the 12 gemstones on the breastplate, the gold rings and chains. Then, without transition, it commands that the Urim and Thummim be placed inside the breastplate. No description of their appearance follows. No account of their origin is offered. They are placed as though the reader was already expected to know exactly what they were. The Urim and Thummim appear 11 times across the canonical Old Testament. In Leviticus 8-8, Moses places them in the breastplate at Aaron's ordination. In Numbers 27:21, Joshua is instructed to inquire of God through the priest by means of the Urim. In 1 Samuel 14, Saul calls for them during a military crisis and receives silence. In 1 Samuel 28, the text specifies that God no longer responds to Saul through Urim, a phrasing that presupposes a prior period of response. Across all 11 references, their function is consistent, a binary answer to a specific question or silence. Their mechanism is never explained. Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews Book 3, proposed they were breastplate stones that emitted radiance to signal divine approval, and noted this function had ceased approximately 200 years before his own writing. Cornelis van Dam, whose 1997 study The Urim and Thummim, A Means of Revelation in Ancient Israel, Eisenbrauns, represents the most comprehensive modern textual analysis of the relevant passages, argued they functioned as a unified instrument rather than two separate objects, and that their use was always mediated through the high priest's direct inquiry. Van Dam's analysis shows their functional references clustered in the Mosaic and early monarchic periods, declining sharply after the establishment of the Davidic dynasty. After Solomon's temple is built, the Urim and Thummim are not mentioned in connection with any specific priestly act. Ezra 2, 63, and Nehemiah 7, 65 both record the same post-exilic ruling. The returning community may not eat from the most holy things until a priest arises to inquire with Urim and Thummim. The conditional assumes no such priest exists and no such objects are available. The truly unsettling aspect is not their disappearance, it is their initial presence without origin. Every other element of the high priest's vestments receives detailed manufacturing specifications. And then, place the Urim and Thummim inside this precisely specified object. No further instruction. Either they predated the Mosaic framework entirely, requiring no explanation because the audience already knew what they were, or the text is referencing something whose physical description was treated as too restricted to commit to writing for general readership. Neither possibility makes the disappearance easier to account for. The Babylonian exile carried the Israelite priestly class to Babylon for approximately 70 years. The priests who returned preserved genealogical records precise enough to exclude those who could not document their lineage. They preserved the law. They preserved the institutional memory of temple ritual in sufficient detail to reconstruct the Second Temple's operations. They did not bring back the Urim and Thummim. The post-exilic governor publicly acknowledged, in writing preserved in the canonical record, that no one in the restored community possessed these objects or knew where they had gone. 11 canonical appearances, a function the text treats as foundational to legitimate priestly authority, and an absence so complete that the returning exiles, who managed to preserve nearly everything else, came home from Babylon with nothing they could identify as the original objects. Number 8. The Book of the Wars of the Lord. The reference appears mid-narrative, without ceremony. The author of Numbers 21 has been tracking the Israelite journey, camp positions, borders, water sources, when the text cites a source, embedded in verse 14. Therefore it says in the Book of the Wars of the Lord, the author extracts a geographical description of the Arnon River region and moves on. The citation is treated as routine, a writer drawing on a recognized reference the audience was expected to know. At the moment Numbers was composed, the Book of the Wars of the Lord existed. It was open somewhere. It was used the way any historical writer uses a contemporary archive. It is not the only external source the canonical Old Testament cites directly. Richard Elliott Friedman, professor at the University of California, San Diego, and author of Who Wrote the Bible, 1987, situated the practice within the tradition of early Israelite historical writing, a period when multiple literary works about the wilderness and settlement periods circulated and were selectively drawn upon by the canonical authors. The Book of Jasher is cited in Joshua 10:13 and 2 Samuel 1:18. The Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel is referenced 18 times across 1 and 2 Kings. The Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah is referenced 15 times in the same books. These are not mythological volumes. They are sources cited with the implicit assurance that the intended audience could consult the originals. None of these books survived. The Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, 18 direct citations, described events across the northern kingdom from approximately 930 BCE to the Assyrian destruction of 722 BCE. The text of 1 Kings cites it as though any literate reader could check it. By the time Ezra assembled the post-exilic canon in the 5th century BCE, it was gone. The Book of the Wars of the Lord predates even these. If the citation in Numbers 21 reflects a source composed during the wilderness period itself, the geographical specificity of the quoted fragment suggests first-hand knowledge of the terrain described. It may represent the oldest Israelite literary document ever cited by name, and one of the first to be permanently lost. The Dead Sea Scrolls, recovered from 11 caves at Qumran between 1947 and 1956, contain more than 900 manuscripts spanning 250 BCE to 68 CE, including texts from virtually every canonical book and dozens of non-canonical works. The Book of the Wars of the Lord was not among them. James H. Charlesworth of Princeton Theological Seminary, whose editorial work on the Dead Sea Scrolls spans multiple decades and volumes, has noted that the Qumran library contains no text identifiable with the external sources the canonical authors cited as historical references. The library preserved what the Qumran community valued. The sources the canonical authors were drawing on had already been filtered out before the Qumran period began. The canon preserved the texts its compilers chose to preserve, cited without apparent concern the texts it did not preserve, and provides no surviving account of the selection criteria. The Book of the Wars of the Lord has no manuscript in any archive, no fragment in any collection, no copy in any language. 3 verses survive because a Numbers author quoted them. Everything before and after those 3 verses is gone. The canon's own author pointed toward a library. The canon did not keep it. No text explains why. Number 7. The Mantle of Elijah. The sequence in 2 Kings 2 is unusual for prophetic literature in its physical specificity. Elijah and Elisha are walking near the Jordan's eastern bank. A company of prophets watches from a distance. Elijah takes his mantle, the distinctive outer garment that has been his defining external characteristic since 1 Kings 19, rolls it up and strikes the surface of the river. The water divides. They cross on dry ground. A chariot of fire appears. Horses of fire separate the 2 men, and Elijah is taken upward in a whirlwind. The mantle falls to the ground. Elisha picks it up. He strikes the river with the same garment. The Jordan divides again. This is not symbolic succession. The text records it as a physical transaction, a specific object held by 2 different people in sequence, producing the same result both times. The mantle appears first in 1 Kings 19:19, when Elijah walks past Elisha plowing a field and throws the garment over him, an act both men treat as an immediately understood prophetic commission. The Hebrew word for it is aderet, a wide outer cloak of wool or animal skin. In 2 Kings 1-8, Elijah is identified to King Ahaziah through the garment alone, a hairy man wearing a leather belt. The mantle is his identifying physical marker, specific enough to describe a person without naming him. After Elisha picks up the mantle in 2 Kings 2, it is used once more to part the river in the same chapter. Then it vanishes from the textual record entirely. Elisha's subsequent ministry spans more chapters of the canonical text than Elijah's entire career. None of those chapters mentions the garment, the object that functioned as the instrument of prophetic transfer and the mechanism of a river division passes completely out of recorded history. It does not appear in temple inventories. No account in the canonical or non-canonical literature records its final location, destruction, or disposition. The site traditionally identified with Elijah's departure near Qasr el-Yahud in the West Bank, a Jordan crossing acknowledged in Byzantine period sources and designated by the Israel Antiquities Authority as an ancient pilgrimage site, has been under periodic archaeological survey. The land in the immediate vicinity has not been systematically excavated for Iron Age material. The disturbing feature of the mantle's disappearance is not that a garment from the 9th century BCE would be difficult to preserve. It is that the Israelite institutional tradition demonstrated, repeatedly, a remarkable capacity to preserve objects it considered sacred through conditions that destroyed everything around them. The ark carried the tablets through the wilderness. The temple preserved Aaron's staff alongside them. The priestly lineage was maintained through 70 years of exile. The mantle of Elijah, which the text treats as having transmitted the defining prophetic authority of an era, appears to have entered no preservation system at all. It was picked up from the ground at the Jordan, used once more at the river's edge, and then set down somewhere and forgotten in a way that nothing else of comparable institutional significance was ever forgotten. The prophetic community of 50 men who watched Elijah's departure from the western bank, recorded in 2 Kings 2-7, knew the specific location. They walked to where Elisha stood after the whirlwind and acknowledged what they had witnessed. 50 witnesses knew the spot where the mantle fell. That knowledge existed in the 9th century BCE, in the minds of identifiable people. It did not survive them in any recorded form that scholarship has since recovered. Number 6. The original tabernacle of Moses. In 1981, Israel Finkelstein, then completing his doctoral work, later professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University, began excavating at Tel Shiloh, a mound rising from the Sumerian highlands, approximately 35 kilometers north of Jerusalem. Joshua 18:1 records that after the initial Israelite campaigns in Canaan, The community assembled at Shiloh and erected the tent of meeting there. Shiloh was where the tabernacle, the portable wilderness sanctuary constructed in the Sinai and carried through the desert for decades, came to rest. If the tabernacle ever became stationary, the text said it ended up on this mound in the hills of Ephraim. Finkelstein's excavations, published in his 1993 report, Shiloh, the Archaeology of a Biblical Site through the monograph series of the Institute of Archaeology at Tel Aviv University, produced a finding that matched the canonical account with uncomfortable precision. The site contained a destruction layer at Iron Age I stratigraphy dated to approximately 1050 BCE, ash, burned debris, and collapsed mud brick consistent with violent destruction. This date aligns directly with 1 Samuel 4. The Philistines defeated the Israelites at Ebenezer, captured the Ark, and destroyed the sanctuary at Shiloh. Jeremiah 7:12, writing 4 centuries later, references Shiloh's destruction as established historical fact. The destruction layer Finkelstein documented in 1981 is the physical counterpart of the event Jeremiah cites as common knowledge. The tabernacle presents the central archaeological problem of its own existence. Its primary materials, fabric, animal hide, acacia wood, do not survive 3,000 years of burial. A tent structure leaves no stone foundation, no permanent wall line. What the tabernacle's stationary presence at Shiloh should have left is the negative impression of its location, a defined cultic precinct, perhaps socket stones for the outer court posts, the artifact signature of priestly activity across multiple generations. Finkelstein's team identified evidence consistent with a cultic precinct at the summit, a large open area with artifact deposits indicating concentrated religious use during the Iron Age I period. Subsequent work by Shlomo Bunimovitz and Zvi Lederman of Tel Aviv University refined the material picture further. More recent excavations between 2017 and 2022 by Scott Stripling through the Associates for Biblical Research recovered additional Iron Age I material, confirming intensive occupation during the relevant window. The tabernacle's construction was precisely documented. Exodus 38, 24 records, 29 talents, and 730 shekels of gold used in its construction. Specific quantities, not approximations. Exodus 38, 25 records, 100 talents, and 1,775 shekels of silver. Exodus 38, 29 records, 70 talents, and 2,400 shekels of bronze. The craftsmen are named in Exodus 31, Bezalel son of Uri from the tribe of Judah, and Oholiab son of Ahisamach from the tribe of Dan. This is administrative documentation. The structure they built was maintained as the central institutional locus of Israelite religion for an estimated 300 to 400 years. After the Ark's eventual return to Israelite custody and transport to Jerusalem, 1 Kings 8-4 records that at Solomon's temple dedication, the priests brought up the Ark and all the holy vessels that were in the tent of meeting, implying the tent still existed and its vessels were transferable. After 1 Kings 8-4 notes this transfer, the tabernacle ceases to appear in the record. No decommissioning ceremony, no burning, no formal handoff, no inventory of its final disposition. The text that once specified its construction to the Graham and the craftsman's tribal affiliation simply stops mentioning it. Tel Shiloh still stands in the West Bank highlands. The destruction layer Finkelstein documented is still in the stratigraphy, the physical evidence of a violent end that Jeremiah cited as historical facts centuries after it happened. The accounting of the tabernacle's materials is preserved in the canonical text with administrative precision. The institution that maintained records of every shekel of gold used in its construction produced no surviving record of its end. Number 5. The Copper Scrolls Treasure. In March 1952, archaeologists working Cave 3 at Qumran, a limestone cliff above the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, found 2 rolled sheets of corroded copper pushed against the cave wall. They were so oxidized they could not be opened without destroying them. After 3 years at the Palestine Archaeological Museum in East Jerusalem, the sheets were transported to the Manchester College of Technology, where H. Wright Baker, an engineering professor, developed a technique using a fine circular saw blade to section the material into 23 strips. The text engraved inside, punched into copper while it was still pliable, had been sealed above the Dead Sea for approximately 2,000 years. When translated, the strips describe something no other Dead Sea scroll contained, a map. The copper scroll, formally designated the third quarter of 15, lists 64 locations in and around Jerusalem where enormous quantities of gold, silver, and sacred objects were hidden. The aggregate inventory, if real, would represent several hundred tons of precious metal. John Marco Allegro, whose 1960 translation brought the scroll to wider attention, argued the inventory referred to genuine temple treasury material hidden before the Roman destruction of 70 CE. Al Wolters, whose analysis appeared in the Copper Scroll, Overview, Text and Translation, Sheffield Academic Press, 1996, identified geographic references that correlate with real locations: the Valley of Achor, the Wadi Kidron area, sites in the Judean desert between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea, and locations in the immediate vicinity of the Temple Mount platform. The scroll is physically anomalous among the Dead Sea texts. It was written on copper rather than leather or papyrus, a material choice implying the document was intended to outlast organic writing materials. Its content is entirely practical: location descriptions, physical landmarks, depth measurements, quantities. No theological statements, no apocalyptic imagery, no biblical commentary. It reads as an inventory with coordinates, which is what it presents itself as. The canonical text itself provides precedent for concealment operations of this type. 1 Kings 14:25, 26 records that the Egyptian pharaoh Shishak raided Jerusalem shortly after Solomon's death and removed temple treasures, including the gold shields Solomon had made. The Bubastite portal at Karnak Temple in Egypt, a relief commissioned by Shoshenq I, the Egyptian identification of Shishak, lists cities from his Levantine campaign. The physical evidence in Egypt independently confirms the raid. It also means the temple treasury had already been partially depleted before Nebuchadnezzar arrived in 586 BCE. If the Copper Scroll describes material hidden before the Roman destruction, it describes the remnant of a treasury that had survived multiple raids across a millennium. Excavations in areas matching the scroll's coordinates, near Qumran, in the Kidron Valley, in the Judean desert, have not produced confirmed material matching the described inventory. In 1999, the Islamic Waqf conducted earth-moving operations on the Temple Mount platform to install electrical infrastructure without archaeological supervision and outside the Israeli Antiquities Authority's standard protocols governing every other registered site in the country. An estimated 400 truckloads of soil were removed and deposited in the Kidron Valley. Gabriel Barkay of Bar Island University and Zachi Devira established the Temple Mount Sifting Project in 2004 to analyze this material. The sifting has continued for more than 2 decades and has recovered thousands of artifacts from First Temple period context: pottery, bole, coins, mixed in the removed debris. First Temple period material was in that soil. What specifically was in it before the earth moving cannot be reconstructed. The Copper Scroll sits in the Jordan Museum in Amman, in 23 strips of corroded metal behind glass. Its text has been published in multiple critical editions. Its geographic coordinates point repeatedly to areas in and around the Temple Mount. The soil from the 1999 platform work has been in the Kidron Valley for more than 25 years. The sifting project continues to find First Temple material in it. The excavation that could address the scroll's most significant coordinates has not been authorized. The platform above those coordinates is open to the sky, administered by an authority that has not permitted systematic investigation of its subsurface since before the modern discipline of archaeology existed. Number 4. The Holy Grail. In the years preceding their 2014 publication, Margarita Torres, a medieval history professor at the University of León in Spain, was working through a collection of Arabic manuscripts from an 11th century Egyptian source when she identified 2 documents that described a chalice. The Fatimid period manuscripts traced an object through a Coptic Christian community in Egypt before it entered the emir's treasury, a cup associated with Jerusalem and the early Christian community there. Torres brought in José Ortega del Rio to develop the historical analysis. Their 2014 study, Los Reyes del Grial, made a specific provenance claim: the inner vessel of the cup of the Infanta Doña Urraca, held since the 11th century in the treasury of the Basilica of San Isidoro in León, matched the manuscript's description closely enough to constitute a plausible chain of custody from 1st century Jerusalem to the present. The object at San Isidoro is an onyx chalice approximately 9 centimeters tall, set inside a gold and jeweled mount added in the 11th century by the Infanta Doña Urraca, daughter of Fernando I of Leon and Castile. The outer casing is clearly medieval. The inner cup is not. It is a plain agate vessel with no decoration and no inscription. Its material consistent with objects produced in the Roman Eastern Mediterranean in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. It arrived at San Isidoro as a diplomatic gift. The Taifa king of Denia received it from an Egyptian source and presented it to Fernando I. The chain of custody from the 11th century to the present is documented through archival sources, Torres and Ortega del Rio, verified directly. The four canonical gospel accounts of the Last Supper, Matthew 26, Mark 14, Luke 22, and Paul's account in Corinthians 11, the earliest textual reference, written in the 50s CE, all describe a cup used during a Passover meal in 1st century Jerusalem. None specifies its material, size, appearance, or subsequent history. The ornate golden chalice of medieval iconography has no basis in any primary source. The archaeological record of 1st century Jewish domestic assemblages, documented extensively through Israel Antiquities Authority excavations, shows cups produced in stone, ceramic, and glass. Stone vessels, including agate, were specifically favored in observant Jewish households because Jewish purity law treated stone as non-susceptible to ritual impurity in a way that ceramic vessels were not. An undecorated agate cup of the San Isidoro inner vessel's dimensions is entirely consistent with 1st century Jewish domestic use. The provenance chain Torres and Ortega del Rio assembled, Jerusalem, 1st century CE, an Egyptian Coptic Christian community, the Fatimid treasury in Cairo, a diplomatic gift to the Taifa of Denia, the treasury of the Basilica of San Isidoro. Each link from the 11th century forward is documented. The first link, Jerusalem, 1st century, is attested by the manuscripts, but cannot be confirmed through physical dating of the object itself. The most difficult aspect of the question is not the Lyon claim, which remains contested in mainstream scholarship. It is the absence of any serious physical investigation of the inner vessel. If the cup used at the Last Supper was a real object, and the primary text offer no indication that it was not, then it existed in Jerusalem in approximately 33 CE, was presumably in the custody of the Jerusalem community in the following decades, and its chain of material possession became archaeologically invisible as persecution diaspora, and the destruction of 70 CE scattered both the community and whatever it owned. A systematic radiocarbon and geochemical study of the agate vessel, conducted independently from its medieval casing, has not been publicly undertaken by any scientific institution. The Basilica has not refused such analysis. No institution has formally applied for it in a manner that entered the public record. The documentary chain sits in the university archive. The physical analysis that could corroborate or eliminate it has not been done. The space between those two things has not been closed by the one method that could close it. Number 3. The Temple Menorah. In early June of 455 CE, a Vandal fleet under King Gaiseric reached the harbor of Rome. The city had already surrendered terms. Pope Leo I had met Gaiseric outside the gates, recorded in the Liber Pontificalis, and negotiated against massacre and arson, though not against systematic removal of valuables. Gaiseric's forces worked the city for approximately 14 days. Among the objects loaded onto ships bound for Carthage, Procopius of Caesarea records this in Book IV of his History of the Wars. Written roughly 80 years after the event, were the treasures of Solomon's temple, the 7-branched golden lampstand, and the golden table, objects that Titus had displayed in his triumph through Rome in 71 CE, and deposited in the Temple of Peace, where they had remained for nearly 4 centuries. The journey of the Temple Menorah from Jerusalem to Rome is the most visually documented object transfer in the ancient world. The Arch of Titus, completed in approximately 82 CE and still standing at the entrance to the Roman Forum, contains a relief panel showing Roman soldiers carrying the 7-branched lampstand in Titus's triumphal procession. The carving is precise: 7 branches on a central shaft, a decorated hexagonal base, the scale corresponding to the specifications of Exodus 25. Stephen Fine of Yeshiva University, who directed the Arch of Titus Digital Restoration Project and published the Menorah from the Bible to Modern Israel through Harvard University Press in 2016, confirmed that the relief depicts the temple menorah with iconographic specificity that distinguishes it from contemporary non-Jewish lamp forms. It is not a generic lampstand, it is a specific object, documented in stone. The menorah resided in the Templum Passus, Vespasian's sanctuary built adjacent to the Roman Forum to house the Jerusalem temple treasures. Josephus confirms this placement in the Jewish War, Book 7. The Templum Pacis burned under Commodus in 191 CE. Procopius indicates the temple treasures survived and were still in Rome when Gaiseric arrived. having been in Roman custody for 384 years. After Gaiseric transported them to Carthage, Procopius continues the chain. In 533 CE, Belisarius, whose personal secretary and campaign historian Procopius was, making him an eyewitness, defeated the Vandal kingdom and returned to Constantinople with the temple vessels among his spoils. Procopius records their display in Belisarius's triumph. He then records a specific subsequent event. A Jewish notable warned Emperor Justinian that these objects brought destruction upon whatever city held them, citing Rome's sack and Carthage's fall as sequential evidence. Justinian ordered the temple vessels sent to Christian sanctuaries in Jerusalem. This is the last specific location any primary source reports for the temple menorah. The documented chain: Jerusalem 70 CE, Rome 71 CE, the Templum Passus 71 to 455 CE, Carthage 455 to 533 CE, Constantinople 533 CE, Jerusalem, reportedly, after 533 CE, unconfirmed by physical evidence or any independent source. 4 primary witnesses: Josephus, the Arch of Titus, Procopius, and the partial Byzantine court records, trace the object across 463 years with unusual precision. Each is contemporaneous with the events described. Josephus witnessed Titus's triumph. The Arch of Titus was commissioned specifically to commemorate it. Procopius was present at Belisarius's triumph in Constantinople. And then the chain terminates. The most disturbing feature of the menorah's disappearance is not the gap after 533 CE. It is the quality of the documentation before that gap. Every link in the chain, from 70 to 533 CE, is attested by a contemporaneous and identifiable source. The chain's dissolution is therefore not a matter of evidence becoming thinner over time, as it usually does with ancient history. The documentation was thick and specific right up to the moment it stops. Inquiries from Israeli institutions to the Vatican regarding the Jerusalem temple vessels, conducted through diplomatic channels in the late 20th century, resulted in official statements that the objects were not in Vatican collections. These statements were not accompanied by independent audits of the relevant storage areas. The Arch of Titus still stands in the Forum. The soldiers in the relief are still carrying the menorah. The arch has stood for approximately 1,940 years. The object it depicts has been documented at specific geographic locations for 463 of those years, and is then absent from the documentary record for approximately 1,490 years, a silence roughly equivalent to the span from the Norman conquest to the present. The relief is precise enough that scholars can debate the menorah's base geometry and the angle of its branches. Nobody has established where the object it depicts was set down. Number 2. The Stone Tablets of Moses. In August 1906, a team under the direction of Hugo Winkler, a German philologist and archaeologist sponsored by the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft, was excavating the archive rooms of Hattusa, the ruined capital of the Hittite Empire in the Anatolian highlands near modern Bogazkoy. When they recovered thousands of cuneiform tablets from storage contexts sealed since the city's destruction around 1180 BCE. Among them was a document in Akkadian that identified itself as the treaty between Ramesses II of Egypt and Hattusili III of the Hittites, agreed approximately 1259 BCE. Winkler recognized immediately what he had found: the Hittite counterpart to a treaty whose Egyptian version had been carved on the walls of the Karnak temple for more than 3,000 years. The two versions matched each other with the precision of documents produced by separate imperial chanceries, working from a shared agreed text, because that is exactly what they were. The formal structure of those treaty documents became significant to biblical scholarship through a landmark 1954 paper by George Mendenhall at the University of Michigan, published in the Biblical Archaeologist. Mendenhall identified that the covenant texts of Exodus and Deuteronomy, the preamble, the historical prologue, the stipulations, the deposit clause, the list of divine witnesses, the curses and blessings, matched the formal structure of late Bronze Age suzerainty treaties of precisely the type produced by the Hittite imperial chancery. The match was not approximate, it was structural and sequence-specific. Mendenhall established that this formal structure was in active use between approximately 1400 and 1200 BCE, and was replaced by different treaty conventions in the Iron Age, around 1000 BCE. A writer or editor working after that transition would not have known to use this form. It was no longer current, Klaus Balzer extended the analysis in the Covenant Formulary, Fortress Press, 1971. K.A. Kitchen, Professor Emeritus of Egyptology at the University of Liverpool, in On the Reliability of the Old Testament, Eerdmans, 2003, examined over 100 Near Eastern treaty documents and demonstrated that the specific sequence of elements in the biblical covenant text is paralleled only in documents from the 14th and 13th centuries BCE. The covenant structure encodes its own historical period in its formal architecture. The tablets themselves are described across 3 canonical passages with unusual specificity. Exodus 31:18 specifies they were written on both sides, front and back, and inscribed by the finger of God. Exodus 32:15-16 repeats the double-sided detail. Deuteronomy 10:1-5 records Moses placing the replacement tablets in an acacia wood box. The Ark, 1 Kings 8-9, is the last canonical confirmation of their physical presence in a specified location. At the time, Solomon brought the Ark into the Holy of Holies during the temple's dedication. There was nothing in it except the 2 stone tablets Moses had placed there at Horeb. The tablets were inside the Ark. The Ark was in the temple. Whatever subsequently happened to the Ark, the tablets moved with it. The physical dimensions of the Ark, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits tall, using the Egyptian cubit of approximately 52.4 centimeters, produce a containment space of roughly 130 by 78 by 78 centimeters, sufficient to hold 2 stone tablets of meaningful size alongside the additional contents referenced in Hebrews 9-4. The golden jar of manna, and Aaron's staff, whose presence with the tablets is also attested across Exodus 16 and Numbers 17. The mechanism of the tablets' disappearance is documented not by an absence in the record, but by an anomaly within it. 2 Chronicles 35-3, set during Josiah's reform in 621 BCE, records the king instructing the Levites to return the Holy Ark to the temple, to bring it into the house that Solomon son of David built. That grammatical construction presupposes the object is not currently there. It is 621 BCE. Nebuchadnezzar does not reach Jerusalem until 586 BCE. And then, Nebuchadnezzar's scribes, who cataloged the temple's contents with the thoroughness documented in 2 Kings 25 and Jeremiah 52, recording the dimensions of the bronze pillars, the circumference of their shafts, the height of their capitals, do not list the Ark, the most prominent and most sacred object in the temple's most restricted chamber, is absent from the most detailed inventory of temple contents produced by any ancient source. It is not recorded because it was not there. Jeremiah 3:16, written in the same period as 2 Chronicles 35, states that in the age of restoration, the Ark will not come to mind, will not be remembered, will not be made again. This is not a future hope. It is a resigned acknowledgement that the Ark is already gone, written by a prophet who appears to know it. Someone removed the Ark from the temple, and the tablets inside it, between the 10th century BCE, when 1 Kings 8-9 confirms they were there, and 621 BCE, when 2 Chronicles 35-3 implies they were not. The person or persons who did this had access to the Holy of Holies, the most restricted space in the most restricted institution in Israelite society. They moved the most sacred object in the national religious tradition deliberately, with institutional authority, to a destination they chose. The tablets that carried the foundational legal covenant of Israelite civilization. Physical objects, described with physical dimensions, placed in a physical container in a physical room, confirmed present in 1 Kings 8, were inside the Ark when this institutional decision was made. Their destination was not recorded in any text that has survived. They have not been found. The legal foundations of the covenant were moved by identifiable agents and taken somewhere. That somewhere remains unrecorded and unexcavated. Number 1. The Ark of the Covenant. In the summer of 1867, a Royal Engineers officer named Charles Warren descended into a shaft he had excavated by hand near the southeastern corner of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Warren was conducting surveys for the Palestine Exploration Fund, the British scientific institution founded that year to apply rigorous fieldwork methods to the geography of the Holy Land. He had already measured the massive Herodian foundation courses of the Temple Mount platform, individual stones estimated at up to 400 tons, set with precision that has been the subject of structural analysis for over a century. Now he was going beneath the platform, working through cisterns, tunnels, and natural rock formations that Warren and his team were the first modern investigators to systematically enter and document. Over the course of his surveys, Warren mapped more than 30 distinct underground features beneath and adjacent to the Temple Mount. His 1871 publication, Underground Jerusalem, issued through Richard Bentley & Son, constitutes the most complete physical survey of the subsurface beneath the Temple Mount ever produced by a named investigator using documented methodology. It has not been superseded. The areas Warren mapped in 1867 remain the most recently directly examined underground features in the zone where the first temple stood. The Ark of the Covenant is described across the canonical text with a specificity that extends through multiple books and through what biblical scholars have identified as distinct literary traditions. Exodus 25 provides the manufacturing specifications: a box of acacia wood, overlaid inside and out with pure gold, measuring 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits tall. On the lid, the Kapporeth, the mercy seat. 2 hammered gold cherubim face each other, wings spread upward and meeting above it. 4 gold rings at the base receive 2 gold-plated acacia carrying poles. The poles are never to be removed. These are specifications of the type a craftsman would use. The Ark's documented presence spans approximately 4 centuries of canonical narrative, constructed by Bezalel son of Uri in the wilderness, per Exodus 37. At the Jordan crossing in Joshua 3, the text records that when the priest's feet bearing the ark touched the water's edge, the river stopped flowing and the Israelites crossed on dry ground. At Jericho in Joshua 6, it preceded the procession around the city. At Ebenezer in 1 Samuel 4, it was captured by the Philistines. At Ashdod in 1 Samuel 5, the Philistines experienced severe physical afflictions. The Hebrew text uses a term denoting tumors or swellings and attributed them directly to the ark's presence, transporting it out of Ashdod to Gath, then to Ekron, then back to Israelite territory. David danced before it in the streets of Jerusalem in 2 Samuel 6. In that same passage, Uzzah reached out to steady the ark when the cart shifted and died immediately. Solomon installed it in the Holy of Holies in 1 Kings 8, and the text records that when the priests came out after depositing it, a cloud filled the temple so dense they could not stand to minister. These accounts appear across what scholars have identified as distinct source traditions: the Deuteronomistic history, the priestly materials, the ark's unusual physical properties. The ark's unusual physical properties, its lethality on improper contact, its association with the audible divine presence in Numbers 789, its function as the most restricted object in the most restricted space in Israelite religion, are described consistently across these source boundaries in a way that other disputed elements of the Pentateuchal narrative are not. The accounts of the ark's properties are one of the rare elements that cut across the source divisions entirely. After 1 Kings 8, 3 textual indicators established the framework for what happened to the ark. 2 Chronicles 35-3, in 621 BCE, records Josiah commanding the Levites to return the ark to the temple, grammatically implying it was not there. Jeremiah 3:16, from the same period, acknowledges the ark's permanent absence with resignation. In the coming restoration, it will not come to mind, will not be remembered, will not be made again. And Nebuchadnezzar's scribes, who cataloged everything removed from the temple in 586 BCE with a thoroughness that extended to the dimensions of the bronze pillars, did not list the ark, not because they overlooked it. They took every object of metal value they encountered and recorded what they took, but because it was not in the temple when they arrived. The physical evidence bearing on the ark's location is geographically distributed and institutionally contested. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintains, as a central element of its national identity, that the ark is housed in the Cathedral of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia. The claim is embedded in the Keber Nagast, an Ethiopian royal chronicle compiled in the 14th century CE, which traces the ark's removal from Jerusalem to Solomon's relationship with the Queen of Sheba. The visit recorded in 1 Kings 10, and a subsequent transfer through Menelik I, Solomon's son. The timeline the Ethiopian tradition proposes for this removal is not corroborated by any contemporaneous non-Ethiopian source. What is not dismissible is the institutional structure surrounding the claim. The church has maintained a dedicated guardian of the ark, a single monk who lives in a restricted chapel attached to the cathedral, whose sole function is custody of the claimed object, as a continuous living office. The object in that chapel has never been submitted to outside examination. The guardian does not permit it. The institutional position has not changed across centuries of outside inquiry. The second book of Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 4-8, records a tradition that Jeremiah, warned by a divine oracle, took the tabernacle, the ark, and the altar of incense and concealed them in a cave on the mountain from which Moses viewed the promised land, which the text identifies as Mount Nebo in modern Jordan. The tradition was established enough by the 2nd century BCE that 2 Maccabees cites it without explanation. Mount Nebo has been under systematic excavation since 1933, when the Franciscan Archaeological Institute based in Jerusalem began work at the site. The institute has documented Byzantine period churches, mosaic floors, and artifacts spanning multiple millennia. A cave matching the description in 2 Maccabees has not been confirmed. The Jordanian landscape around Nebo includes an extensive system of natural caves and fissures that have not been fully mapped or entered. Eilat Mazar of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, whose 2005 and subsequent excavation seasons in the city of David produced significant First Temple period material, administrative bulle, a large public building she identified as potentially Davidic, pottery consistent with 10th century BCE occupation, was excavating in the zone immediately south of the Temple Mount. Mazar's work produced the material signature of the First Temple period in the area directly adjacent to the temple's location. The Temple Mount platform itself, directly above where the Holy of Holies stood, has not been excavated under modern archaeological conditions at any point in the 20th or 21st century. The Israeli Antiquities Authority, which governs excavation at every registered site in the country, does not have jurisdiction over the Temple Mount platform. The Islamic Waqf, which administers the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque on the platform, has not authorized systematic investigation of the platform's subsurface. The technologies that could investigate the subsurface of the Temple Mount without excavation, ground-penetrating radar, muon tomography, seismic reflection surveys, have been deployed successfully at sites across the ancient world, including at Giza and beneath Pompeii. None has been authorized for systematic use beneath the Temple Mount. The political and administrative architecture surrounding the site, established in its current form by the arrangement between Israel and the Waqf reached after the 1967 war, has governed access to the platform's subsurface for nearly 60 years without material change. Here is what the physical evidence, taken entirely from verifiable historical sources, establishes. The ark was in the temple at Solomon's dedication, confirmed in 1 Kings 8. It was not in the temple at some point before 621 BCE, indicated by 2 Chronicles 35-3. It was not captured by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE, confirmed by its absence from an inventory comprehensive enough to record the wall thickness of bronze pillars. It was not returned from Babylon, confirmed by its absence from Ezra's vessel inventory. It was not present in any location accessible to the 2nd century BCE authors of 2 Maccabees, who referenced a concealment tradition without suggesting the object had been found. The ark was removed from the temple by people with access to the Holy of Holies, moved to a destination they chose deliberately. And the record of that destination was either never committed to a surviving text or was removed from the canonical compilation. The people who moved it were not operating carelessly. They were working within an institutional tradition that had maintained the ark's custody with documented precision for 4 centuries. They placed it somewhere specific. That specificity, the deliberate, institutional, controlled concealment of an object whose unusual properties the canonical text describes with unusual consistency across multiple source traditions, means the ark's location is not a matter of archaeological accident. It is a matter of institutional memory. At the center of the Dome of the Rock, the Umayyad shrine completed in 691 CE under Caliph Abd al-Malik, a massive outcropping of natural bedrock is exposed beneath the Golden Dome. This is the foundation stone, the Even Hashatiyah, which Jewish tradition identifies as the rock on which the Holy of Holies was built and on which the ark rested. Beneath the foundation stone, there is a small natural cave accessible through an opening in the rock's upper surface. Warren entered it in 1867 and documented it as a natural formation roughly 6 by 4.5 meters, with a ceiling of approximately 1.5 meters. Warren noted additional features in the cave's floor, a cistern connection and a further opening, and recorded them in his survey maps. The cave has not been systematically examined since Warren's visit. The foundation stone sits beneath the Dome of the Rock at the center of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, within reach of every modern imaging technology the discipline of archaeology has developed. Ground-penetrating radar exists. Muon tomography exists. Seismic reflection surveys exist. The instruments that could assess what lies beneath the cave floor without disturbing a single stone of the platform have been used at dozens of sites of far lesser historical significance across the ancient world. The only thing separating the question from a potential answer is an administrative arrangement between human institutions that has remained stable for nearly 60 years. The cave Warren entered is there. His notes are there. The rock above it is visited by millions of people each year. The administrative arrangement around it has, so far, proved more durable than any instrument the discipline of archaeology has yet developed to look through it. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now, and make sure to subscribe.